I spent 3 whole months mapping out this cruise. It was supposed to be a 7-night getaway on a luxury ship, just for the two of us. I headed out there with high hopes, really looking forward to some quality romance. But by day 3, it hit me that my wife hadn't come on this trip for my sake. Paige and I had been married for 16 years. We bought a place in a quiet neighborhood just outside Portland, spent years paying down the mortgage, and built up the kind of regular life you do when you think you've got all the time in the world. Yet, in all those 16 years, we never actually took a proper vacation. There was always something getting in the way. The mortgage, her job, my job, or a roof that needed fixing. We just kept telling ourselves we'd take that big trip down the road. So when I finally booked this cruise, it felt like I was finally delivering on a promise I'd been carrying around for ages. It was a 7-night trip up the Inside Passage to Alaska, sailing out of Seattle. I even got us an ocean view cabin, the kind with a big window so you can wake up right next to the water. I didn't skimp on the cheap option either. I wanted her to see how much this meant to me and how much our marriage mattered. I put 3 months of work into it, comparing different ships, researching the ports, and carefully picking out our cabin deck. I catch myself grinning at my desk just thinking about the trip. 16 years is a long stretch to go without just sitting still together. Deep down, I truly believed this getaway would bring back something that the passing years had quietly worn away. We drove up from Portland in our Outback, luggage loaded in the back and coffee sitting in the cup holders. Paige was 39 and I was 46, and during the drive, she cracked up at something on the radio, reached over and squeezed my hand. Right then, I thought we were going to be completely fine. I really believed that. I need you to understand that I genuinely believed it. The first hint of anything strange popped up in those very first few days, before I even knew what to make of it. Paige just kept walking away. It was always for some minor reason. One afternoon, she needed to grab a coffee. Another time, she claimed she forgot a sweater in our room and had to go fetch it. After that, it was souvenirs she wanted to check out. On their own, none of these things seemed all that strange. People wander around on a cruise ship, sure, but she'd be gone for a really long time. We're not talking 10 minutes here. It was more like 40 minutes or a full hour. When she finally walked back in, she'd be a little out of breath, her face flushed, spinning some story about a long line at the cafe or getting turned around in the hallways. In the beginning, I bought every single word of it. A ship that massive can definitely be confusing during the first couple of days. I just figured she lost her bearings, so I'd pour myself a drink, watch the coastline slide past the window, and wait for her to return. But the thing about a cruise ship is that it's designed so you never actually have to walk very far. There's a bar on pretty much every single deck, plus pools, lounges, and a cafe around literally every corner. Everything is close by and totally convenient, which is the whole selling point of the trip. So when your wife disappears for an hour just to grab a cup of coffee from a pot being poured 2 hallways down, the math just doesn't add up. I didn't open my mouth about it. I didn't want to turn into the kind of husband who tracks every single minute. But I found myself keeping count anyway. I did it quietly. Every single time she stood up and claimed she'd be right back, I'd glance at the clock, and I'd feel a little disgusted with myself for even checking. Then I picked up on 2 more details, and those were a lot harder to brush off. The first issue was the internet. Out on the water, the ship's Wi-Fi is incredibly pricey and slow, and the connection drops all the time. Most folks give up on it by the second day, tossing their phones into a drawer so they can actually look at the ocean. That's practically the whole point of taking a cruise. But Paige did the exact opposite. She started hovering over her phone like it owed her money. She'd wander off to check a work email, or step outside to send a quick text to her mom. She carried that thing the way you hold on to something you're absolutely terrified of losing, always keeping the screen turned toward her chest with her hand wrapped tightly around it. The second incident took place on our 4th afternoon out, when I tried calling her. She had wandered off somewhere again, to her usual spot, and I called just to see if she wanted to grab an early dinner. The phone just rang and rang. I tried a second time but got nothing. For 40 minutes, my calls went absolutely nowhere. When she finally showed her face again, she apologized and said she simply hadn't heard it, didn't hear it. This was the exact same phone she'd been gripping in her hand all day long, every single day since we boarded the ship. It was a phone she wouldn't even lay down on a table. Yet, somehow, for 40 whole minutes, she didn't hear it ring. I sat there and chewed on that for a bit. Then I forced myself to drop it. I was exhausted, and I figured I was just overthinking things. I didn't want to turn into some paranoid, jealous guy fabricating a crime out of a slow elevator ride and a patchy cell signal. I refused to be that person, so I buried the thought, smiled at her, and we headed out to dinner. The following night, an urgent work issue popped up that I couldn't ignore, something requiring about an hour of my time. Paige suggested taking a solo stroll around the ship, so I told her to go right ahead. The outdoor decks get incredibly cold at night up there. The wind whips straight off the water and cuts right through you, even in the summertime, and even with the sun still hanging in the sky at that latitude. When she finally stepped back into the cabin, she had a jacket draped over her shoulders. It was a dark, heavy men's jacket, way bulkier than anything she owned, and it definitely wasn't mine. I knew every single article of clothing I had packed, and that jacket had never been inside our bags. I asked her about it, keeping things completely casual and quiet, just wondering where she picked it up. For a split second, a genuine second, she completely blanked. I watched the panic cross her face. Then she found her cover story. She claimed she ran into an old friend up on the deck, someone she hadn't crossed paths with in years who was traveling with his family. She said they grabbed a quick drink together, and when he noticed she was shivering, he offered her his jacket, and she simply forgot to hand it back before walking off. It was a smooth explanation. It even sounded plausible, the way things do when someone has had a moment to piece a story together. I didn't have a single shred of proof, not one bit. But my gut has almost never lied to me, and right then my instincts were screaming. From that exact night on, I kept my eyes wide open. Every single time she made a move, I made sure I knew exactly where she was heading. The very next evening, I waited until the entire cabin went dark, and I forced my breathing to become slow and heavy, mimicking a man fast asleep. It didn't take long at all. Paige crept out of bed, gently cracked the door open, and slipped out. The absolute second that door clicked shut, I was on my feet. I trailed her out into the hallway and followed her up onto the decks, keeping my distance and letting the other passengers fill the space between us. A cruise ship at night makes tailing someone pretty easy. There was music playing somewhere, groups of strangers walking around, and plenty of light and noise to blend into. I actually lost sight of her for a brief second near a stairwell, but then I spotted her again, and that's when I saw them. They were sitting at a small table, tucked away in a distant corner right by the railing where the crowd started thinning out. They were talking and smiling at each other, using the kind of expressions people only share when they think nobody else is watching. Then he reached across the table and gently brushed a strand of hair out of her face. He threw his arm around her waist. Then, just like that, smooth and easy, they kissed. Something inside my chest just snapped shut. My first instinct was to march right across that deck, stand over their table, and force them to look me in the eye. But I held back. Making a scene in front of 100 total strangers would only give her the exact narrative she wanted. I'd look like the unhinged, jealous husband, and ship security would have had me pinned by the arms within 60 seconds. Whatever I was going to do, it was going to happen without an audience. I walked straight back to our cabin and sat down to wait for her. I wanted to hear the truth come directly out of her mouth. I needed to figure out who this guy actually was to her. Maybe he really was some old acquaintance who lent her a jacket, or maybe he was just some guy she picked up on the ship. But the real truth was something I couldn't have guessed in a million years. While I sat there waiting, I started packing. I pulled every single piece of her clothing out of the closet and the drawers, folded them into her suitcase, and set it right in the center of the cabin floor. Then I stood right next to it. I didn't practice a speech or rehearse what to say. I just stood there with that suitcase and waited for the doorknob to turn. When Paige finally walked in, she was probably expecting one of two scenarios. Either her husband was fast asleep, or he was half watching a movie on the TV. Instead, she walked into the bright lights and found her own suitcase packed up on the floor with me standing right beside it. I looked at her and asked, "Who's the guy you were just holding onto up on the deck?" I saw the whole thing with my own eyes, so don't even bother lying to me. She immediately jumped right into denial, speaking so fast she almost cut me off. She told me I had it completely wrong, that they were just talking, and told me to stop making a scene. She kept spinning it, trying to convince me that I hadn't actually seen what I saw, making it out like I was the one with the problem. I didn't bother arguing with her. There was absolutely nothing in it for me. You can't reason someone out of a lie they've already decided to commit to, and I wasn't about to waste my entire night trying. So, I grabbed the handle of her suitcase, wheeled it out into that narrow ship hallway, and ushered her right out after it. Then I shut the door. The corridor on the other side went completely silent. I stood on my side of the door and didn't open it back up. The next morning, I took my time heading up to breakfast. They were already there, sitting together at a table right in the middle of the open dining room. No hiding in corners this time. No trying to cover their tracks. They didn't need a cover story anymore, and they weren't going to pretend otherwise. I didn't give them a long look. I drank my coffee, ate my breakfast, and felt absolutely no urge to walk over to their table. After I finished eating, I headed down to the front desk. I had the staff completely cut Paige off from any of our shared cards, and I told them that any new charges she made from that second on needed to go strictly on her own personal account. Starting that morning, she couldn't spend a single dime of my money while vacationing with another man. I also made sure it was officially on record that we were no longer traveling as a couple and were no longer sharing a room. That left me with 4 days completely by myself on that ship, and I'll be completely honest with you about how those 4 days felt. It wasn't some big celebration. I ate my meals alone, and I started noticing in this strange, quiet way that I didn't have to put on a performance across the dinner table anymore. I spent my time reading out on the balcony because the room felt incredibly heavy with her gone, and the fresh air outside just felt easier to breathe. At night, I'd walk up to the ship's railing and just listen to the sound of the water cutting against the hull. It was the first true quiet I'd experienced in years. It wasn't exactly peace just yet, but it belonged to me, and nobody was lying to my face inside of it. I flew back home all by myself, back to our place outside Portland, and the very first thing I did was pick up our shared tablet. We had a single account between us with one login, meaning everything synced up automatically without either of us giving it a second thought. Photos, notes, texts, it all pooled into the exact same place. Paige clearly never thought about that. Honestly, I'm not even sure she remembered that tablet existed. But it was all right there, months and months of it. Every single message between her and that guy opened up right in front of me in perfect chronological order, from the very oldest to the newest, like a book I'd been banned from reading. Whatever tiny shred of hope I'd been holding on to, the idea that this was just some stupid shipboard fling or a brief moment of weakness, it completely vanished the moment I looked at that screen. I found his booking confirmation for the cruise. I found logs of the two of them coordinating their dates. I found them talking weeks before we ever set sail about exactly where they could meet up on the ship without being spotted. And then I hit the part that completely knocked the wind out of me. She hadn't just told him which ship to book. She explicitly instructed him to book the exact same class of cabin we had, ensuring he'd be placed on the exact same deck, close to us and close to her, for the entire 7 nights. That was the moment I stopped looking at this as some affair she accidentally stumbled into. She didn't stumble into anything. She engineered this entire trip. The exact vacation I spent 3 whole months planning for the 2 of us, she had been quietly planning too, except she planned it for the 3 of us. The very next day, I took that tablet, drove straight to a lawyer's office, and filed for divorce. I didn't spend time agonizing over the decision. There was simply nothing left in our marriage to weigh out. Whatever path back we might have had, it had completely closed out on that ocean, and I knew it. Roughly 2 weeks later, Paige sent me a massive text message. It went on for pages. She was incredibly sorry, saying she'd never been so filled with regret. She claimed she'd made the absolute biggest mistake of her life and begged to see me, wanting to sit down so she could explain everything and make me understand. I read through it once and didn't bother replying. When the silence finally sank in, she shifted her tactics. She started trying to reach me sideways, going through our old mutual friends and asking them to talk to me, and then going through my own parents, begging them to work on me and soften my stance. The narrative she wanted them to deliver was always identical. She'd agree to marriage counseling, she'd walk away from every single piece of property without putting up a fight, and she'd give up absolutely anything if I would just grant her one final chance. But my family didn't budge. Not my friends, and definitely not my parents. They listened to what she had to say, stood firmly in my corner, and told her so in plain English. A few weeks after getting back home, I found out one last piece of the puzzle. The guy she had mapped out this entire vacation around, the one she risked a 16-year marriage just to be near, had completely dumped her not long after the ship docked. I pushed the divorce through to the very end. Every single attempt she made to drag me back into a conversation went completely unanswered. I didn't do it out of spite or cruelty. There was just absolutely nothing left inside of me that had any desire to pick up that phone again. I've spent time thinking about whether I could have handled things differently. If this had just been one bad night, one too many drinks, or a single moment where she lost her footing but instantly regretted it by morning, maybe I would have sat with it a bit longer. Maybe I would have given her a chance to explain herself. People make mistakes, and sometimes a marriage can weather a stumble. But that's not what happened here. You don't accidentally stumble into a calendar. You don't accidentally instruct another man on exactly which cabin room to book so he's sleeping just 2 hallways down from your husband. She didn't fall into this mess. It was a vacation she carefully calculated, and she planned it entirely for herself and for him. In the end, I was just the guy who picked up the tab. When the divorce was finalized, the house remained mine, along with the rest of the life we'd built up. I'm not going to pretend like that part didn't matter to me. After 16 years of hard work, a man shouldn't have to walk away completely empty-handed. But truth be told, the marriage had already ended long before the paperwork was signed. It ended right there on that cruise ship, in that tight hallway, the exact moment I rolled her suitcase out the door and shut it. Everything that followed was just the legal system catching up to a reality I already knew in my gut. For the husband, this cruise was supposed to be a way to rekindle the old spark and get some romantic time together. Instead, his wife used the luxury vacation to be with another man right under his nose. She was completely confident that on a massive cruise ship, she could easily have her cake and eat it too. But she made one critical mistake, and it brought her whole world crashing down. Thanks for listening. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to leave a like. There are plenty more untold stories on the way.